Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in AP English, and we turn now in our study of the Iliad to book 23, Funeral Games for Patroclus. Some have found this book really out of place. I mean, we got in book 22 that really kind of powerful scene where Hector and Achilles are going to face up, go against each other, and Achilles ultimately jacks Hector. And then all of a sudden we turn around, and after a little kind of a funeral that's given to Patroclus, we've got these games, like Olympic games going on. What is up with that? I think that we'll want to argue that it makes total sense that we would have this book in the end of the Iliad. Book 24 will obviously be the reclamation of the body of Hector by his father Priam. We'll get there. In some ways we want to see this, put this in your notes, as book 23 is Achilles' return to humanity, as we were talking about the fact that he's anything but human in the preceding books. Now, let's just cover our bases here. We only do this 2 more times, obviously, but I like to remind us of where we've been and to begin to see some sense of continuity in this truly classic text. Go to LearnStrong if you haven't been watching my stuff. Go to learnstrong.net, find the AP folder, and watch the lectures there in the AP folder over the Iliad. Book 1, Invocation of the Muse, Achilles, Agamemnon have their falling out. Book 2, Agamemnon's bad dream. He thinks that the Greeks are going to win, sent by Zeus. Catalog of ships and chariots is well part of that. Book 3, Paris fights Menelaus, is wounded. We think that the war is over because Menelaus has won, but in book 4, Zeus and Hera have a conversation. Hera convinces Pandarus, a Trojan, to shoot an arrow to wound Menelaus, and now the war is back on. Book 5, we have Diomedes' Aristeia. Remember, that term is an important one. Battle type scene. And Diomedes will in fact fight, and he will kill a lot of people, but he will even wound Aphrodite and Ares, 2 gods, right? Book 6, important book for us. Hector in the walls of Troy with his wife Andromache, as well as Astyanax, his son. Book 7, Ajax or Ajax will fight against Hector. We come to some kind of standoff or truce. Book 8, we have Zeus and his famous scales. The Trojans and Hector now will begin their ascent and begin their defeat of the Greeks. So much so that in book 9, the embassy is sent to Achilles from Agamemnon of Odysseus, Phinox, and Ajax, and Achilles will say no. I paused at review 1 through 9, and I called it Achilles' crisis of faith, where he will reject the warrior code. He will reject the idea of time or honor. He will reject the idea of kleos or glory, and he will say, I'm not interested in it anymore. But of course the obvious question is, if the thing you've grown up believing you no longer believe, then how do you live the rest of your life? On what grounds do you have motivations for the actions you commit? I think it explains the over-response that we see of Achilles in the final books of the Iliad. In book 10, we have Diomedes and Odysseus' night raid, where they will jack Dolan. In book 11, we have Agamemnon's Aristeia, leading ultimately to Achilles sending Patroclus to Nestor to check on the troops, and it will be there that Nestor will make his famous suggestion that Patroclus wear Achilles' armor and return into the war. We have, of course, the beginning of the longest day as well as in book 11. Book 12, the Trojans at the trench of the wall, the ramparts, Hector's boulder, the famous boulder. Book 13, Poseidon dressed up as Calchas encourages the Greeks. And then finally, we meet Paris for the last time in this poem, where Hector will taunt Paris, and then we will have Hector's famous scream at the end of book 13. Book 14, sex meets violence. Hera will seduce Zeus, and then during that time, Ajax will almost kill Hector with a boulder. We got a lot of that boulder stuff going on. Book 15, we've got Zeus waking up, very upset, tells Poseidon to stop, sends Apollo to heal Hector, and now the Trojans again will begin their jack. Leading us to book 16, Patroclus' book. Here we have the death of Sarpedon by Patroclus, Sarpedon the son of Zeus. Then we will have Patroclus' Aristeia, and ultimately, of course, Hector killing Patroclus. Book 17, we have the fight over Patroclus' corpse. Hector puts on Achilles' armor, and Antilochus is sent to tell Achilles his best pal Patroclus is dead. Book 18, Achilles will mourn Patroclus, will ask his mother Thetis to go and get him armor, and she does so, and that's that famous section for the shield and the armor that Hephaestus will make for Achilles. Book 19, Agamemnon and Achilles kiss and make up. They blame gods and women for their problems instead of taking self-responsibility. Achilles will then prepare for battle, and Roan Beauty, his pony, will have a conversation with him where he says, you will kill Hector, but you're next. Book 20. Achilles' Aristeia begins. We have that scene, that famous scene where the gods will fight. Aeneas and Hector both will be saved by the gods. In Book 21, Achilles will fight Lycaon, the son of Priam, where he gives himself up and still Achilles will kill him. He fights a river. We have the silly gods and their fighting happening. It's a silly book all the way around to set up Book 22, the death of Hector. And of course, he's fooled by Athena, and the fall of Andromache's veil will give us the full symbolism of what's going on. Now, just to remind, our hope here is that you've read this material on your own. You use me as help. Our learning theory reminds us that we're always connecting new information to old information in meaningful ways, especially when we do that in our annotative work in the 3 levels of reading. Level 1, what does the text say? Level 2, what does the text mean? And 2A, themes, messages. And 2B, rhetoric. Not what Homer says, but how he says it. We're looking specifically at symbolism and irony. We'll see both of those present here in Book 23. Finally, at level 3, how can I relate to this information? Make it my own it in some way. And here we'll ask at 3A, relating to other texts, especially to the preceding books of the Iliad. And finally, how do I relate it to me personally? Let's do a real quick review of Book 23. It naturally divides into 2 parts. The burial of Patroclus, physically the burial of Patroclus, and then the games that Achilles wants to give in Patroclus' honor. Okay? We begin with Achilles and Patroclus' funeral. Achilles continues to not eat and to not bathe. He sleeps by the ocean. The ghost of Patroclus will come and visit him. Here we'll see maybe where Shakespeare got his ghost in Hamlet, as well as his ghost just momentarily, you'll remember, to Brutus in Julius Caesar, right? Then there's, Patroclus will say, as a ghost, as a visitation, will you please bury me? I need to be buried so that I can get into the underworld. At daybreak, they get lumber. They each cut off a lock of hair. They have a major sacrifice, 4 stallions, 2 dogs, and 12 Trojan youths that, of course, Achilles captured earlier in the poem. So we have human sacrifice actually happening as well, right? We then are told very briefly, and it's really the only mention of Hector in the entire book, very briefly that Hector's body is being protected by Aphrodite and Apollo so that Achilles can do all the nasties that he wants to it, and that body's still going to be there, right? And next we have the winds that will be requested to burn everything on the pyre, and then the ashes are collected because Patroclus asked for this, put in an urn, and they're going to sit in that urn because Patroclus asked that soon when Achilles dies, his ashes will be as well subsumed inside of the urn. It's always been a question of readers of the Iliad why we don't have the death narrative of Achilles. I think it's powerful that it's not in the Iliad. We know it's coming. It would be almost like anticlimactic that it would actually happen. Once that happens and the body of Patroclus has been burned and brought the bones, the charred bones, into the urn, we then have the second part of this book, which is the funeral games. Now we're going to ask about these games. What is up with that? Here in a second, but let's just go through it really quickly. These different games are different contests, starting with a chariot race. We have a winner and we have finishers. Diomedes will win, Antilochus will come in second, Menelaus third, Idomeneus will come in fourth, and then Eumelus, who has actually got the best ponies, comes in last. Achilles wants to give Eumelus some kind of prize, and he wants to give him second place because he has pity for him, and that'll be a pivotal moment. We begin to see Achilles as having some kind of human feelings, finally. And he's ready to give Antilochus' second prize, and Antilochus will say, no way. At line 619, we're told Achilles will smile. He likes the young man. But Menelaus then speaks up and says, hey, the reason I came in third and Antilochus came in second is because he cheated. And he gets really upset about this, but they settle their argument. That is to say, we get an example of what healthy conflict resolution actually looks like, as opposed to what happened in Book 1 when Achilles and Agamemnon had their falling out. Finally, Achilles will give old man Nestor a trophy, a prize, and the old man loves it, okay? The second event is boxing. Epeus will beat Euryalus, and then event 3 is wrestling, where Odysseus and Ajax will fight and wrestle. They come to a stalemate. Achilles will stop them, and he will say, you both can share the prize. For each one of these contests, there's a prize. The prize, by the way, for the wrestling match is a tripod and a woman. They're going to share the prize. I'll let you kind of figure out what you think that means. Event 4, we have a foot race, which will remind us obviously of Achilles and Hector running around the walls of Troy. Odysseus will win. Ajax gets tripped by Athena, and he will literally fall and eat a bunch of poop, okay? And Antilochus is last, but he flatters Achilles and ends up getting some gold for it, okay? Event 5 is a duel for Sarpedon's arms, okay? Because remember, Patroclus won these arms in the contest. Diomedes is named the winner over Ajax by Achilles, okay, at the end. Again, another kind of standoff. Event 6 is an iron toss. In other words, they show some strength. Think about it as almost like a discus or something like that, and Polyctetus is going to win this one. Event 7 is archery. They have a dove. They tie a string to the leg, and they send it up in the air. Teucer, the great archer, who, remember, dropped his arrows earlier in the poem, he hits the rope, but not the bird. But Meriones will hit the bird itself, and everybody's kind of awed by the fact he can hit a flying bird, and he gets the prize. Finally, the spear toss is the 8th event, and Achilles will name Agamemnon the winner, even without trying, and that's how the book ends. And of course, you can kind of sense that maybe Achilles is doing a little bit of, you know, helping out the old friend enemy, right, in Agamemnon. Okay, let's turn now to the opening lines, as we often like to do. And I've said this in every one of these lectures, dude. I wish I could just read it all with you. I can't. But I want to jump in here and hit at least a few lines for us. So, we're told opening lines, they grieved at Troy. One of the only mentions of Troy in this book. While Achaea's troops pulled back. Once they reached the warships, moored at the Hellespont, the contingent scattered, each man to his own ships, but Achilles still would not dismiss his Myrmidons. So, his thousands of troops, he will not let them go. He gave his battle-loving comrades strict commands, charioteers in fast formation, friends to the death. We must not lose our teams from the war cries yet. All in battle order, drive them past Patroclus, or Carthage will mourn the men with teams and chariots. These are the solemn honors owed the dead. And then, after we've eased our hearts with tears and dirge, we free the teams and all take supper here. It's ironic that Achilles, who has taken bodies and thrown them into Scamander, the river, Xanthos, and said, let the fish eat you, you don't need a burial, is hypersensitive about the burial rites for his pal Patroclus. All is one, we're told. The armies cried out in sorrow. Achilles led the chant. 3 times they drove their full-manned stallions round the body. Myrmidon soldiers mourning, and among them Thetis stirred a deep desire to grieve, and the sands grew wet with all their tears. The armor of fighting men grew wet with tears, such bitter longing he roused. Patroclus, the terror, who routed Trojans headlong, Achilles led them now in a throbbing chant of sorrow, laying his man-killing hands on his great friend's chest. Here in a little bit, he's going to be cradling the head. And he says, farewell, Patroclus, even there in the house of death. Look, all that I promised once I'm performing now. I've dragged Hector here for the dogs to rip him raw, and here in front of your flaming power I'll cut the throats of a dozen sons of Troy in all their shining glory, venting my rage, we're back to the opening line of the poem, on them for your destruction. So, Achilles triumphed, and again he was bent on outrage, on shaming noble Hector, one of the only mentions of Hector in the book, in the poem, in this chapter. Noble Hector, he flung him face down in the dust beside Patroclus's bier. So you've got the mourning over Patroclus happening. Then you have a very interesting thing where Achilles is going to go out and he's going to sleep on the beach. He won't bathe. He won't do anything still normal. He doesn't want to eat even, right? And he will then go down and he will go to sleep. I'm at line 63, 65, 66, 67 or so. Achilles lay down groaning deep from the heart near his Myrmidon forest, but alone, we're back to that notion of alone, on open ground, where over and over rollers washed along the shore. No sooner had sleep caught him, dissolving all his grief as mists of refreshing slumber poured around him there. His powerful frame was bone-weary from charging Hector, straight and hard to the walls of windswept Troy. Then, the ghost of stricken Patroclus drifted up. Now, we're going to get a little bit of an insight as to what the Greeks thought about afterlife must be like. And here, we're going to have the ghost of Patroclus. This will make us think of, obviously, the ghosts of the bodies that Odysseus are going to be in underworld, in Hades, in the Odyssey, right? He was like Patroclus. He was like the man to the life, every feature the same, tall build and fine eyes and voice, and the very robes, we're back to robes again, that used to clothe his body, hovering at his head. The phantom rose and spoke. Sleeping, Achilles? You've forgotten me, my friend. You've never neglected me in life, only now in death. Bury me quickly. Let me pass the gates of Hades. They hold me off at a distance, all the souls, the shades and the burnt out, breathless dead, never to let me cross the river, mingle with them. Now this notion of needing to bury, put it in your notes at 3a. Obviously this is Sophocles and his play Antigone. We saw that play right when we were younger. That idea that Antigone has to bury the body of Polynices, here we have it. Patroclus is actually saying, it is the gods' wish that you would bury me, right? They leave me to wander up and down. If I don't get proper burial rites, right, the gods will leave me abandoned, lost at the house of death with the all-embracing gates. In other words, this will explain why it's such a big dog deal when Achilles throws all those bodies into the river and he doesn't allow them proper burial. This will explain why it's such a big dog deal that Priam will come from the city of Troy and beg for the body of his son back, right? Oh, give me your hand, I beg you with my tears. Never, never again shall I return from Hades, once you have given me the soothing rites of fire. So in other words, there's going to be this burning the pyre, and then he'll be able to be allowed to enter into the house of death. Never again will you and I, alive and breathing, huddle side by side, apart from loyal comrades, making plans together. Never. And then the line, grim death, that death assigned from the day that I was born has spread its hateful jaws to take me down. And you too, your fate awaits you too, godlike as you are, Achilles. I pointed this out in earlier lectures. Paris is here all the way to the end of the poem. He's just not here. Every time Achilles is mentioned, we know that it's going to be Paris and Apollo who will take down Achilles, right? Achilles, he says, it is your fate to die in battle beneath the proud, rich Trojans' walls. But one thing more, a last request, grant it, please. Never bury my bones apart from yours, Achilles. Let them lie together. And what he asks for is, when I'm burned, put my ashes in an urn. When you are dead and your body is burned, then put those ashes together so our ashes commingle, right? And then at line 111, Achilles reassures the ghost warmly, why have you returned to me here, dear brother friend? Why tell me of all that I must do? I'll do it all. I will obey you, your demands. Oh, come closer. Throw our arms around each other just for a moment. Take some joy in the tears that numb the heart. Just one last opportunity to be together. In the same breath, he stretched his loving arms, but could not seize it. No, the ghost slipped underground like a wisp of smoke with a high, thin cry. We've heard these cries all the way through the Iliad, and if you've been reading with me all the way through, you realize how much the poet starts to bring together. Can I say weave? Sure, I'll say it. Weaves together compelling kinds of ideas here at the end, right? And Achilles sprung up. We've seen this before. Go back to Iliad 9, right? And with a start, and staring wide, drove his fists together and cried in desolation, oh God! So even in death's strong house, there is something left, a ghost, a phantom? True, but no real breath of life. We're going to hear more about this when we study the Odyssey. All night long, the ghost of stricken Patroclus hovered over me, grieving, sharing warm tears, telling me, point by point, what I must do. Marvelous. Like the man to the life. In other words, Patroclus was always telling him what to do when he was alive. So we're told Achilles cried, and his outcry stirred in them a deep desire to grieve, as dawn with rosy red fingers shone them weeping. Next we will have the funeral. The funeral will be a kind of big deal, right? We got to go get this wood. We got 100 by 100 square feet, huge funeral pyre, right? Okay. Interestingly, at line 155 or so, the Myrmidons covered the whole body deep with locks of hair. So you cut off part of your hair. They cut and cast upon him, and just behind him, brilliant Achilles held the head of Patroclus in tears. This was his steadfast friend, whom he escorted down to the house of death. This is the same image of Thetis holding Achilles' head earlier when Patroclus was brought back. And of course, Achilles realized it was his fault that it all had happened, right? Next we'll have more about this funeral. So I can't read it all, I wish I could, but I will jump to line 195 or so. Achilles set 2 handle jars of honey and oil beside Patroclus, leaned them against the fire. Then with wild zeal, slung the bodies of 4 massive stallions onto the pyre, gave a wrenching groan. The dead lord of Patroclus had fed 9 dogs at table. He slit the throats of 2, threw them onto the pyre. And then a dozen brave sons of the proud Trojans he hacked to pieces with his bronze. Achilles' mighty heart was erupting now with slaughter. He loosed the iron rage of fire to consume them all. So in other words, human sacrifice of 12. So he kills 4 stallions, 2 ponies, 4 stallions, 2 dogs, and then 12 men. He loosed the iron rage of fire to consume them all and cried out, calling his dear friend by name, "Farewell." Here's our final words. "Farewell, Patroclus, even there in the house of death. All that I promised once I performed at last. Here are 12 brave sons of the proud Trojans, all. The fire that feeds on you devours them all, but not Hector, the royal son of Priam. Hector I will never give to the hungry flames. Wild dogs will bolt his flesh." So he threatened. But the dogs were not about to feed on Hector. Aphrodite, daughter of Zeus, beat off the packs day and night, anointing Hector's body with oil, the prince's skin as he dragged him back. With oil, ambrosial oil of roses. So Achilles could not rip the prince's skin as he dragged him back and forth. And round him Phoebus Apollo brought a dark cloud down from the high sky to the plain to shroud the entire space where Hector's body lay before the sun's white fury could not sear away his flesh, his limbs, and his sinews. So in other words, Achilles cannot destroy the body of Patroclus, or I'm sorry, of Hector, right? Finally, we have the issue of the fire needs wind. There's no wind, so it's interesting. We're back to the pre-Iliadic stories of Agamemnon needing winds, and so he has to sacrifice his own Iphigenia, his own wife, his own daughter to get it. Now we're going to have something similar, no winds, and so messages are sent. Please send the winds. At 2:45 we got it. Message delivered. Off she sped as the winds rose with a superhuman roar, stampeding clouds before them, suddenly reaching the open sea in gale force, whipping whitecaps under a shrilling killer squall. They razed the good rich soil of Troy and struck the pyre, and a huge, inhuman blaze went howling up the sky.